Welcome to the Spirit of Truth video podcast. Joining us today is Dr. Chris Halvorson. Now, he's not your average cat. He's well learned in the Urantia Book and has been sharing the teachings for many years. Join us as we get to know him and get to know his past. Stick around. Welcome back. Joining us today is my friend, Dr. Chris Halvorson. We're very lucky to have him. Welcome, Chris. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me here, Derek.
So I know you're a guy who's in high demand these days for your brain, mainly.
Hopefully for my mind, not just that blob of protoplasm.
Quite a receptor you have in there. So anyway, I'm really excited about this opportunity, and I know you have a lot of fans out there that you've helped contribute in their education and their study and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of want to start a little bit from the beginning just to get people on track with your development. Mm-hmm. So maybe could you let us know how you came to the Urantia Book and how you got started in this whole adventure?
Sure, yeah. I found it surreptitiously in the summer of 1990. I was actually just poked into the bookstore. I was curious if the new RSV version of the Bible had made it to the stacks yet. There was all kinds of pre-publication controversy and hoopla about it. And I was raised in the Lutheran Church, and I was just curious about it, and just poked in there to take a peek and look in amongst the Bibles on the shelf, and it wasn't there, but there was this strange book shelved with the Bibles. Now, I learned many years later the local readers would do this. They'd go into bookstores and they'd take the book out of the box, because it was in a box back in those days.
The Urantia Book.
Yeah, take the Urantia Book out of its box and put it in various other places. From where it's normally shelved, right? In the bookstore. And so, I'm looking through the Bibles, and what is that great big book, the Urantia Book? And I slid it off the shelf and looked at it, and very curious. I was pretty familiar with lots of, odds and ends books that, right. Sort of are on the fringes of society. But never had run across this. And I looked at it. I was a starving grad student at the time, so there's no way I could afford it. But I thought, well, this is weird. But I was there with my wife and two kids. The youngest had just been born, and so it was, we could only kind of dwell so long, and it starts to get complicated.
Sure.
So I just put it back on the shelf and left. And a couple of weeks later, we just happened to be, going by the bookstore again, and I had the same thought of, I hadn't given the Urantia Book a thought the entire time, but I had the same thought of checking on whether that new Bible was in there. So I walked back there again and looked, and it wasn't there yet, but there was that Urantia Book thing again, and I pulled it off and looked at it some more, and you look at talking about Nebadon and Orvanton and the life and teachings of Jesus. It's like, what is this thing? And I, like I said, I knew I didn't have any money to buy it, but my wife said, well, you should go check and see if it's in the library. But okay, I hadn't even thought of that. And again, I had no idea. I was in Boulder, Colorado, from a Urantia Book perspective. I went to the library, and whoa, there's like a whole bunch of them in the card catalog,
Cool.
What in the world? And of course, the usual fare, there was like 9 of them in the card catalog, but you went to the shelf and there was 1 on the shelf.
Oh, yeah.
Because everyone just runs away with them. But sure enough, there was one. So I checked it out and I started reading, and I initially was very curious what this bizarre book would say about Jesus. So I started reading in part 4, and I would read and eventually I'm sitting there and I say, oh, Katie, you got to hear this. This is my wife, Katie. And I'd read her a little snippet, that I thought was really odd, kind of different, and I go back and read some more. Pretty soon, after I'd done that many times, she said, "Why don't you just sit here and just read to me?"
Oh, okay, cool.
and so that's how it began, and it didn't take long. I introduced it to a friend of mine, and he noticed in the newspaper a little blurb that there was an intro meeting for people who are interested in the Urantia book, and we're all both going, "Whoa, what?" Someone else knows about this book?
Cool.
Like I said, I had no idea. I was in the midst of the Boulder Urantia community, and we went, and Paula Thompson was there, for instance, and got to know a couple of people in the community. They invited us to a study group. And thus it began.
As it began. So then, well, before I go a little further, what is your background? Like educational background or professional background?
So as you could tell from what I just said, I was in the midst of grad school at the time. I had gotten my bachelor's in physics and math. I came to Boulder. I was born in Boulder.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
So when I was looking around for grad school, when I found out that the Boulder physics department, CU physics department, had an astrophysics PhD, which was what I was interested in, I didn't apply anywhere else. I thought, let's go back to my roots.
Wow.
And so I was working on. I ended up getting just a straight PhD in physics, but my dissertation was an astrophysics project. And I finished that in the spring of 91. So see, I'd found the book in the summer of 1990. So I was very much in the midst of wrapping up my dissertation and everything as I was beginning the journey with the book.
Wow. Cool.
As things unfolded, once I got my degree, and we're going to study groups all the time. Kids were getting involved in the children's groups, and it was, let's see, so I guess it was by about 2000. So after 10 years of studying the book, trying to just get your bearings in this vast new complexity. I began to go beyond that immediate analytic engagement of the facts in the book, the words in the book, and just trying to digest it all, and begin to put it in order. I began to approach it in a more synthetic fashion, and started to put together a few basic little essays, little attempts, kind of just for my own benefit, if nothing else, to see if I could take some of the basic facts in an area and kind of get it all together in my mind in a clear, systematic way.
Yeah. Well, you had the privilege of coming from such an academic background that, physics and science is so important. And then now you're looking at this revelation science, and you're trying to organize it in your brain, essentially, is what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And then almost like study aids for yourself as to how does this correlate? Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying? And then did that turn into more like teaching from there?
Yeah. So the way that worked, it was just sort of a slow evolution of, just being in my first study group to, more and more, leaning into, making comments during the group and, and et cetera. If I remember right, I finally kind of officially started my own group in 2005. So after 15 years,
wow,
with the book.
Okay.
And I called it the New Horizons Study Group at that time. And at that time, the local community was, they were trying to limit how fractured everything had gotten. Where there was this little group over here and this little group over there, and no one really saw each other that much. And so we rented an educational wing in one of the downtown churches here, and had all the groups meet on the same night.
Huh.
And so at that time, I was starting up another group in that study group central, we called it.
Cool.
And one thing led to another. I mean, the project of kind of having multiple groups on one night slowly evaporated, but my group kept going. Eventually, we moved to another church that we could get a little bit lower rent.
The irony.
Since it wasn't so bad. We had like 6 groups meeting on one night, but it was down to just us. We couldn't handle the rent, and so it's been going ever since. I mean, I've been doing that study group all these years.
Yeah, I've been blessed enough to be able to attend some, and I've seen how you've evolved over the years. I mean, you guys are streaming now, and maybe if you want to let people know when they can tune in. Yeah,
so that Friday night group runs local time from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. And if now that everything kind of here, let's go aside for a second. In 2013, I decided that it was time to let go of the job I had for a lot of years and try to devote full time to the revelation.
Wow!
So I started up a nonprofit entity called Perfecting Horizons Incorporated.
Right.
And I've got a DBA of Perfecting Horizons Institute. So there's a website, perfectinghorizonsinstitute.org.
Okay, I'll put a link on the description.
And when you go there, right up on the homepage, there's links to be able to sign up for the webinar for that Friday night. What we call a public discussion group. It's free, free group. Just sign up. You can tune in on the webinar, and then we also have people, of course, that are local that are in the room live. And we have, sort of the full complement is in play that night. There's probably 30 on the webinar and 10 in the room.
Yeah.
And that evolved from back in the day before webinars and such things. There might be 40 in the room.
Right.
But it's evolved with time.
So let's talk about that. So that Perfecting Horizons, and I would say that you guys have touched on things, and you in particular have touched on things kind of more revealing, unfolding the Urantia Book in ways that people can apply to their current life now, like what science is doing, what history was about, even racial migrations, political movement, whatever it is. You found a way to tie that into with what the Urantia Book is talking about as far as origins, histories, and destinies of where we're going, right? And I completely appreciate that, because I'm a huge fan of part 3 and all the history, especially with the Sumerians and stuff like that. So in my mind, I'm really curious to kind of pick your brain about some of the, I don't know, discoveries or realizations that you've come up with that are a little bit controversial, but not, they don't need to be controversial. Because I know you have a background in physics, and what's going on in our astronomy, in how we are discovering new things all the time, but yet the average human doesn't know how to make sense of any of it. So I was wondering, maybe you could give us a little perspective on how you teach the physics, or what is modern physics situation right now, currently, something like that.
Well, you mentioned maybe some of the things I say are controversial. It's like, let's step back a second. It's a revelation. It's by definition controversial.
Right.
And especially the 5th epochal revelation. I mean, if we knew what was going on, more definitively back with the 1st and 2nd epochal revelations, okay, they were engaging the people of those days in a quite general way. But in contrast to the 4th epochal revelation, the 5th is very controversial. The 4th epochal revelation, Michael is coming incarnate as Jesus of Nazareth. He's on a very precise spiritual uplifter mission. For instance, when Thomas and Nathaniel are wanting him to get into a lot of things beyond just that role as spiritual uplifter, he says, okay, don't worry about your various ideas or various ideas of God that someone else might have. Just focus on the ideal of his infinite and eternal nature. Mm-hmm. Okay, just that. Forget about ideas. Mm-hmm. He was there just as that spiritual uplifter. We have a material, mindal nature by nature to begin with. And he's trying to get people to add an inner life to that outer life.
Right.
The fifth epical revelation is assuming you've done that step. You now have a genuine inner life, not just feelings about the outer life, but a genuine inner life, transcendent of feelings. Something that's genuinely engaging spirit substance, your mind's connection to that other substance in the external world and all that comes with it, all of the spirit ministries that are coming in via that substrate. If you look at the very first paragraph in the foreword, it says, okay, 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, let's not worry about the ideas about God. Okay, we're going to worry about the ideas now. Your ideas have issues, serious issues.
Yeah.
And in order to give you encouragement to better ideas about God, we've got to give you an entirely different framework for everything. You can't just get better ideas for God, about God, without the bigger context. I mean, that's why you don't have better ideas about God right now, because you're so ignorant and so confused about everything. All of your science, all of your history, the whole nature of spirit and celestial beings and everything is all just anthropomorphically ridiculous,
right,
etc. Your concept of biology has all kinds of issues, etc. I mean, so they need to give you the full package. In other words, unlike Jesus's effort, which was just addressing your fundamental relationship to spirit and eternity, and hence trying to foster a genuine religious beginning for you, not just benefiting from your superconscious relationship to these things, but to begin to have a conscious relationship,
right,
a genuine conscious inner life.
Right.
And hence, his effort is basically a religious effort because of that. The Urantia Book is not merely a religious text. Neither is it just, say, a scientific text. If you notice there's something about stars or atoms or whatnot in it, or dinosaurs.
Right.
It's a philosophic text, which includes all of science and religion. It's trying to give you that big picture, that full encompassing picture, which means it's going to challenge you very, very deeply in every way.
I can attest to that. I come from a martial arts background where I kind of took on that self-challenge of inner life. So I appreciated the Urantia Book's rigorous self-evaluation process or whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I have a question for you is, mm-hmm. Where do you see kind of like there's almost like a cutoff of those who are willing to be completely raw, ripped apart by the revelation and then build back up, and those who are happy to be a part of it but are not tearing down and rebuilding type of thing. So how do you view that?
It works perfectly precisely in that mode. It's unlike the first, the second, and the fourth epical revelations, which were dispensational epical revelations designed fundamentally to engage the entire planet. The third and the fifth are not dispensational revelations. They're epical, but not dispensational. And that means they're not fundamentally designed to be able to engage everyone in a very natural, evolutional, meet them where they are as they are way. Think about the third epical revelation, Melchizedek of Salem. Makaventa Melchizedek comes, and there's two modes to what he does.
Okay.
On the one hand, he engages Abraham. He's engaging the main evolutionary stream. And what he's working to do there is not to revolutionize the main evolutionary stream. After all, if he was genuinely trying to be a revolutionary, he'd be a rebel.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, he's there as one of the Melchizedek receivers because there was a rebellion and then a default.
Right.
So he's engaging Abraham and that main evolutionary stream. He knows whatever he says is going to be put in the old wineskins of evolutionary religion, but he's trying to make sure that the faint flicker, the spiritual pilot light, doesn't totally go out before Michael arrives.
Right. It was low at that point, right?
Right. It was on the verge of, Jesus is going to come as a spiritual uplifter. Well, you can't uplift something that doesn't exist.
Right.
So he's trying to keep something there. But there's another mode to what he did. The mode that isn't writ large in history. There's a parallel stream that he set up to the main evolutionary stream, basically engaging the Kenites.
Right.
Okay. And he's engaging them with very vast, as much as they can handle, rigorous, more cosmic perspective. He's setting up that parallel stream so that down the road a ways, for instance, out of that stream, out of the influence of that stream, can come Moses and can keep the main evolutionary stream going. He's generating a parallel stream of leaders or potential leaders. Okay. An emergency revelation like the third and like the fifth, a non-dispensational, hence by definition, emergency revelation. They don't just give you revelations because it's an evolutionary process, right? We basically have to just work things out, through the evolutionary process. But so if they step in, it means there's some sort of an emergency.
Right.
Okay. Well, it's here, back then with Makaventa, it was a spiritual emergency, in individuals. Okay. That was taken care of, with Michael of Nebadon engaging us. You can't have a spiritual emergency. Anymore. We all have thought adjusters by grace.
Spirit of truth.
Right, with the spirit of truth, exactly. But there's another emergency. There's a philosophic emergency. There's a civilizational emergency that needs to be addressed. Where, as they say, at the beginning of the 20th century, you were quivering on the very brink of two modes. Right? A coming fork in the road. Truth, the spirit of truth, if nothing else, accelerates and makes it more definitively bifurcated. Black and white.
Draws a line.
Right. It draws a line.
Right.
It splits families in two.
Sure.
That sort of stark line. Either you're quivering on the very brink of moving definitively forward as a civilization, or you're going to have an interregnum.
Well, to make that clear for other people, one of the cool, interesting concepts in the Urantia book, it says whenever there's like a transitional time, there is an opportunity where you can have a breakdown, right? Yeah.
And that happens just developmentally within you. Remember they even point that out with Jesus as he's developing. There's that dicey adolescent time,
exactly,
when you're making the transition. And, did the parents and the cultural environment give you enough framework to help you through that difficult transition where you stand more upon your internal integrity subsequently? Whereas before you were kind of leaning on your environment.
Right.
Can you make it through that transition where more of the law is written in your hearts and instead of written and enforced from without.
Yeah. And I was just reading the part in the Urantia book where young, maybe he was like 12-year-old Jesus is at Jerusalem, and he's really disgusted by some of the practices over there. But as he's leaving, he stands on Mount Olivet and overlooks Jerusalem, quivering head to toe, saying, I'll come back and help you guys get past your enslaved minds to traditions and stuff. But what got me is that then Jesus' own mother, Mary, was kind of like renewed in her hope that he was going to be this Messiah king for Jerusalem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The second David.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And and like I said, a while back, I mean, he was not there to engage sociological issues, economic issues, political issues. It was a purely spiritual mission. The fifth epical revelation engages all that stuff, takes it head on, and is trying to remind you of the fundamental truths of the philosophy of government. Because if you don't know them, civilization collapses. It's trying to remind you of your fundamental truth foundation for science. Without it, science just becomes an elaborate rationalization scheme predicated on magic.
Yeah. It's this evolution of magic that a lot of people are still kind of touching upon, right? Like this dumbed down version of it, or
and like you were saying a minute ago, there was with the 6th century BC awakening of philosophy and many other things, booster shots for religion and whatnot. Because, like I said, philosophy is the whole framework, and so
sure.
The religious element, the scientific elements within that, get a booster shot too. But for 2,500 years, up to the beginning of the 20th century, you had this slow, difficult effort to try to figure out what philosophy is, how you do reflective thinking, how you make any progress in those areas. But we'd made some by the grace of our gifts, especially our encirclement in the Holy Spirit that gives us those cosmic insights that allow us to just recognize some things. Allows you to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Where does self-evidency come from?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Your encirclement in the Holy Spirit comes from that insight that you're given, that intuition you're given. You just know it. You don't deduce it.
Right.
But we built up to the normal evolutionary apex. Just like with biologic evolution, it reaches its peak within itself, and then an Adam and Eve come to uplift that, because it can't go any higher by itself.
Sure.
We had reached the apex philosophically of that evolution of philosophy, and we needed a philosophic gift to uplift. Remember, normally the magisterial son comes to do that.
But that's normally.
That's normally. Nothing normal about this world. Right, so we were quivering there on the very brink. See, of taking that assistance and going up from it, or beginning to lose everything. And unfortunately, instead of an even greater enlightenment succeeding the 3 centuries of the Enlightenment, we began the Endarkenment. And we're getting deeper and deeper into it philosophically.
As you call an intellectual backslide or some sort?
Yeah, it's just, we still have lots of intelligent people. We have lots of technological advancement. But the basic philosophic framework is evaporating. And so you're not going to, your technology will add more decimal places to precision based upon the current theories, but you're not going to make any genuine new discoveries, because you're just rationalizing the appearance that you're satisfied with. You're not trying to dig to the deeper reality behind those appearances anymore, which you can't do by observations and experiments. You have to do that via insight. You have to, I think what's really underlying it is this. Let's build a theory based upon that assumption and see if it works. as opposed to, well, we've got a rationalization scheme and it works, and
yeah,
we're content.
I see that a lot, and that's kind of like why I don't watch TV too much anymore. But I was kind of wondering what it's like, like my process when I'm watching TV, or maybe I'm traveling and I see like all these shows that claim credibility and try to tell me everything about science to history to religion, and in my heart I'm kind of like, nah, I already know a lot of this other stuff for my own living. And so I wonder, what's kind of the process for you when you're reading the newspaper, watching TV, going through Facebook, and you see such equivocation on this planet and such emotional fervor instead of letting the truth cut through and tell the story?
Yeah, I mean, the first, the more you have internalized the basic truths of evolution of civilization, evolution of government specifically, say, or these various, evolution of religion, they give you such a wonderful synopsis of in the Revelation. The more you can see, once that philosophic frame begins to dissolve, everyone just starts slipping back into the natural mode. I mean, civilization is not natural.
Right.
Civilization is a choice. And when you stop choosing, it goes away.
Right.
And everything just goes back to the natural state. And so the basic, evolutionary religion is founded upon our fear, animal nature, fear-based animal nature, and, is developed through our illusions.
Right. Yeah.
And so you see everything slipping back to fear and illusions, for instance. One of, as I just mentioned several times, one of the key elements in that sort of natural frame of mind is you think magically. That's just the way we are.
So expound on that. What is thinking magically to you?
Thinking magically is when you cease to have a factual causal foundation for how you attempt to interpret your experiences. I mean, the first cosmic intuition, your logical acumen, is your basic foundation for what we call common sense. It's what gives you this desire to not just come up with some satisfying figment of your imagination and base everything on that, but to actually base things on objective external fact, and to know it when you see it. Right. It allows you to recognize fact and distinguish it from figment. And it also gives you that sense that reality is inherently logical, causal, if nothing else. I mean, foundationally causal. When you assume magic, you don't need facts and you don't need causation. What are the basic things that J.K. Rowling, has to invoke to write a story about Harry Potter or whatever? She can't have those foundational elements that come from our first cosmic intuition. She needs to let go of those. She needs magic. Okay, and so she can't have the law of identity, for instance. Right? You can be both a person and a cup of water at the same time. Right. It's like, no, that's illogical. Well, how do you know? Well, I just know. We know that. But she wants Professor McGonagall to be able to jump off the desk as a cat and morph into a woman, a witch, and walk down the aisle. Right. It needs to be both a cat and a witch or a human at the same time. Yeah. Okay. She can't have the law of identity. Right. Right. She can't have the law of locality. You can't. You need to be able to have something to be in two places at the same time, or two things to be in one place at the same time. Right. These basic elements, just causality itself. That to have something happen without a cause. An effect without a cause. Right. That's the magic. Right, that's magic. So
what's your take on, I'd say like, me personally, even on the first episode, I said, the Urantia Book presents a a storyline that is kind of the antithesis to the Hollywood storyline, is what I always say, just to be, kind about it. But what I've noticed is that there's this growth in Hollywood as far as superheroes and magical things, So, but yet there's an excitement in the youth about magic that it's like their spirituality of some sort.
That's been quote unquote spirituality for so long, and that just reminds you of, we have all kinds of natural definitions of spirit and truth and personality and God, and but what are those really? I mean, the real definitions have to be found through an unnatural pursuit with your mind. You're not going to find them naturally. I mean, like I said a while ago, I mean, think about how strange it is that you coined the word philosophy way, way back there with the ancient Greeks, and still no one really knows what it means.
Right.
Or the word truth, or the word faith, or the word spirit. And you say, well, they know what the word spirit means. They coined it. It meant breath. Yeah, but you can tell as we play with it, it's like, no, we had this notion there's something called spirit, and then we just rationalized, well, I think what that word applies to is breath. It's not like they saw breath and called it spirit. It's the other way around. You have this word and you're trying to figure out what to put it on. Right? The language comes down into us. And then we have to try to figure out in our ignorance what to put the label on. Right? And the fifth epochal revelation is trying to help us to recognize what these words really refer to. Truth doesn't refer to correct understanding, or just when you want to say that your facts are better than, my facts are better than your facts, and so I call my facts truth, or something,
Right.
And we use these in very self-serving ways, these terms, and at best we use them in ignorant ways.
Absolutely.
It's trying to get us beyond Pontius Pilate, quid est veritas, what is truth? I mean, what is it? You can't look it up in the dictionary. And think, even with the spiritual uplifter, you still can't go to the dictionary and look up the word faith and get a correct definition. You look in the dictionary, it says it's credulous belief. No, that's not what faith is. And so, there's all that language difficulty. And of course, anyone reading the fifth epochal revelation, you have to overcome that.
Yeah.
Those are your old wineskins.
Well, how about the group that, people have been reading the Urantia book for 40, 50 years and have not overcome that, though?
Like I said, it has two modes. It needs to help with the main evolutionary stream. The way that will work is people will find the book. They will get a new awakened spark within them. They'll be able to hold on to a couple of little details. They'll take that into the main evolutionary stream. They're not going to take the book into the main evolutionary stream. They're going to take their basic kind of slightly reframed evolutionary religious perspective, for instance, and just add that little tweaking to the evolutionary stream. But there's going to be some, and this is where I see my ministry, is that parallel stream. Mm-hmm. Those who, like you said a little bit ago, want to just get out a big eraser, erase everything, and start from scratch. Yeah. To know that kind of by grace, they have a hold of some threads of truth, but there's all sorts of foolish, figmentary, illusory notions that they've wrapped around that, and they need to strip all that away. They need to get back to the foundation. You need to do what Jesus told you to do. Right? Go back to your initial, by grace, encirclement in the Holy Spirit, the insights that were given to you at roughly age 6, that you find in the kingdom of heaven within. Go back to that little child, right? That didn't have a whole bunch of polluted so-called adult notions about God and what have you, science. And go back and start anew. And remember that the universe is inherently logical. Totally. There's no magic. And it'll be there forever. You can slowly begin to work your way towards it and come into relationship with it. Stop thinking you define it.
Right. That's a big one. That's a huge one. I'm glad you said that, because just this notion of even surrendering to it, submitting to it instead of dictating what it should be. Right.
Yeah. And just think about how difficult this is for us on this world that's been steeping in the sophistries of rebellion for 200,000 years. I mean, so many of us, if someone approaches you with an attempt to be definitive, their first thought is, you're not the boss of me.
Right.
I mean, that's the voice of the rebellion.
Sure. But it's also the voice of our culture, our society, that we're steeped in it.
Right. I mean, no one knows that there really was a Lucifer, or someone you could call Lucifer, use that human designation. And then there really was this rebellion and this philosophic war on high. Right. They don't know that, but you don't need to know that consciously to go, to slip unwittingly into the framework. See, I mean, that's why there's an emergency. I mean, humans have never been evolved enough, if you will. They've never been wholly spiritual enough to really stumble into the sophistries of the Lucifer Rebellion until now.
Huh.
I mean,
what would stumbling into the sophistries of Lucifer Rebellion look like?
Well, you just unwittingly, you start to think, I don't think I really need any fundamental education. I think I'm pretty much innately divine.
Yeah.
I think my thoughts are what they ought to be, just to begin with. Well, that's the third principle of the Lucifer Rebellion. When you start thinking like that, that you don't need all of that educational regime, trying to get you into conformity with the cosmos. You're fine just by nature.
Well, we see that a lot. I mean, I see that in a lot of my youth friends where they're kind of like put off by government, and so anarchy is the right answer, and it's this blowback scenario, I feel like.
Right. And that for when you look, that's why they give you all this stuff on the rebellion, is to teach you the pathology of this, what an adequately spiritualized mind stumbles into in its ignorance. If you weren't adequately spiritualized, you just go along prosaically and you're kind of fine. But you get the mind a little more animated. Okay, now it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Now you can start to tear yourself apart with this newfound power. And so when you see the three principles, Lucifer didn't discover those in that order, 1, 2, 3. He discovered in 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Right? I mean, you start with just that basic sense that, I really think myself is adequate unto itself. Kind of a more literal meaning of solipsism.
Well, that's such a tricky slope, man. Lots of room for equivocation there. And I feel like because we're telling ourselves, the blowback from, let's say, the baby boomer generation, and then, my generation getting told that, we deserve trophies coming out of the womb.
Right.
And that we're good enough already.
Yeah.
And it's tricky because God does love us already as we are, but no, we're not good enough yet. We need to get towards perfection too.
Yes, you are a child of God, but you're not an adult of God to begin with.
Right.
You're just a child of God. You're given the fact of being a child of God by grace, but you're not given adult of God by grace. That takes a lot of effort. As it says in the book, you have to take delight in cultivating, right? Your initial, by grace relationship to the cosmos, supplying favorable conditions so that you are grown. The more you think you've got it all, or you think you're the builder, no.
Yeah.
Do you know the physics of mind and spirit growth?
Yeah.
No one does. Right? We don't even believe in those as literal energies right now.
Right. Good point.
So you need to trust to be grown. You need to supply the favorable conditions to be grown through difficult adolescence of God into adults of God.
Yeah.
Like it says, I mean, God gives you these things, but he expects you to grow.
To mature, yeah.
Yes.
Be like a child in the kingdom, but my Father expects you to mature.
Children of God don't get to the Isle of Paradise.
Yeah.
Really, really advanced adults of God get to the Isle of Paradise.
Well, then how do you see? I mean, because there's a sentimental notion of when children, display faith or show, maybe a little bit more maturity than what's expected of them. But I also feel like there's like an unhealthy push of children in our society that as if we need to throw out all of our professionals and listen to the babes to tell us how we're going to move forward into society also.
Yeah. Right. See, again, and that's see, you're stumbling into the third principle when you think like that, as if we should listen to the children. No, children have empty skulls. That they start as blank slates.
But yet also there is value in that the blank slate is not
there's
jaded either.
Right. I mean, yes, like Jesus said, I mean, not childish though.
Right.
I mean, find that God-given child of God, but not the animal child and all of its ignorance and childish. I mean, little children don't know the fundamental principles for sound democracy.
Absolutely.
When they come out of the womb.
Yeah.
Right? And no one will if you stop teaching those.
This is true.
Even more so if you start teaching just the opposite. Right? It took us 1,000,000 years to figure out some of those principles. And we're rapidly throwing them all out.
Yeah.
Thinking we know better than what the evolutionary process has given us through the school of hard knocks.
Yeah. Well, we're also at this phase where we're kind of like rediscovering our history too, as I brought up kind of like the Sumerians and things like that. And I'm always fascinated and interested in how you talk about the history. And, there's so much speculation that can come from reading the Urantia book, but I admire when someone kind of really breaks it down. And I'd say one of the hot topics in society right now is that I was hoping maybe you could help us out with it is these monolithic structures that have been developed around the world in ancient times. And I know the Urantia book talks about a lot of the Andites and their development. Some people who've been reading the Urantia book for a long time maybe aren't even privy to that factoid or that Imhotep, the talented Egyptian architect, built the first pyramid. And I was wondering if maybe you could just kind of briefly describe to the people at home who built all those stone structures.
Yeah. I suppose, when did it start? Back in the 70s, it really kind of started in earnest. People started noticing these places on the planet, usually they're kind of megalithic stone sites of various sorts, or curious things related to them. It's like, what's up with this? It seems non sequitur.
Right.
I thought we were kind of just picking berries, and then magically, suddenly there was Samaria. What is all this other stuff? People started trying to come up with theories. Is it ancient astronauts? Is it this, that, and the other thing? In general, what lies behind all that mystery is, like you said, the Andites, the mixed descendants of Adam and Eve, those biologic uplifters. In ancient times, prehistory times, there were, not quote unquote supermen, but in a sense, there were these people that just genetically had a lot more innate sense of civilization, of technology, and they traveled all over the world, and they left behind their mark.
Yeah.
Now there's also, besides the Andites, there's also the Midwares.
Right. Yeah. Now, where would you, I have lots of theories that the Midwares were maybe some of them were aligned with the Andites in order to support them due to be from the lineage of Adamson, things like that.
Right. Especially those secondary Midwares, they were kind of just in freeform mode, roll your own life. And some of them were rebels and doing all sorts of strange things, but even the ones that weren't rebels were setting their own courses, charting their own courses, and were from our perspective, were doing strange things.
Yeah.
Right. Those secondary midwares could easily help with, moving massive stones and things. I mean, they have control over, they're kind of mini power beings,
Sure.
To a degree. They're a little bit power being, a little bit, angelic like spirit being, together. And so between just the basic, very directional, civilizational, exploring mentality of the Andites, you have also this possibility of the secondary midwares kind of helping with that. But it leads to all of these sites all over the world, and we've only begun to discover them, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
If we knew where to dig, like they say, So, we'll more and more, it will be difficult to believe that everything just came out of nowhere in, roughly between 6,000 and 5,000 BC.
Yeah, you go from, like you said, from nowhere, from nothing, picking berries, to all of a sudden advanced pottery and artwork and weapons and stuff.
Yeah, advanced senses of architecture and government and, and all kinds of things. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's your take then, in the Babylonian tales? I think it's really important that people, I know it's going to be hard for the average person to decipher, determine the difference between Sumerian occupation and Babylonian occupation in the Fertile Crescent. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, it's important because stories start to change, pre-2000 BC versus post-2000 BC. Right. Things flip. Right. And so you also see that all of these gods are really important for each city-state. Mm-hmm. In Sumer. Right. And what's your take on that? Because there's a lot of theory that maybe those were rebel midwares too, demanding, allegiance or whatnot.
I mean, the book obviously indicates that some of our illusory gods in the past didn't just come out of our imaginations. That there were many strange things happened in those days, as they say. There's obviously some of our ideas about, spirit beings, ghosts, even gods, lowercase g, has its stimulus from what those beings were up to. Especially the secondary midwares.
Right.
The very fact that they would say, you've got this name Beelzebub. Mm-hmm. Well, very appropriately, that's applied to the head of the rebel midwares. And you're left, do you suppose that's a case where they're not just taking a human name and say, apply it to this actual historical figure,
right? But
saying that name comes down to you from people naming that rebel midware who was engaging them.
Yeah.
Right. Lots of names in the book, they're just taking some designation we have and saying, look, we're going to use this as an English designation for the chief executive of Nebadon, Gabriel. We're going to use Gabriel for him. We're going to call him a bright morning star. Okay. It's not like anyone on high is speaking in English or Latin or whatever.
Well, it's interesting then when you start to break down those words, because like Beelzebub is like Lord of the Flies, right? Isn't that what it means?
Well, no, it's more kind of Lord of the Dung.
Oh, so flies are in the situation, though, right? See, you look at it and probably, there was those that recognized that, this was someone who was up to no good. He was up to mischief. He wasn't a being fostering light. He was a being fostering darkness. Right.
And all that is nasty.
Well, it's so interesting though that then we get like a movie in Hollywood called Beetlejuice, and you summon him by calling him 3 times. You know what I mean? It's like it's always showing up.
Yeah, we have this whole mythology, that the revelators help us to recognize, got some stimulus from actual facts. Like even the concept of dual spiritism. Initially, we didn't have good spirits and bad spirits. We just had one flavor. But eventually, we developed the idea that there's good ones and bad ones. The good ones give you good luck, and the bad ones give you bad luck.
Right, and that's where a lot of the cults came out of, like the Evil Eye cult and the.
But the very
cult.
fact that there's was a rebellion.
Right.
There really were these rebel beings.
Right.
And some of them were engaging humans, and so no wonder. We decided there were good ones and bad ones. It seemed to get validated by our experiences.
Sure, yeah.
And then there's stuff like you mentioned, hero movies, becoming so popular again. It's like, well, when you get rid of God, you go back to the old modes, and sort of the apex of the old mode. You started with rocks and hills, and you're worshiping them, and you're worshiping trees and animals, and eventually you get to worshiping humans.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, you get a great battle hero like Thor. He becomes a mythological god.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of people, I mean, that was the first one that factoid that jumps out of the Urantia book when you hear about Thor. You're like, whoa, I didn't even know about that.
It really was a Thor.
Yeah.
Right?
And then, I was privileged to hear you speak about, the beginnings of the days of the week and stuff like that. And then a lot of people, they say Thor's Day or whatever, but it really goes back to Dalmatia, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, we were reminded that we have a lot of Northern European influence,
Right.
in our language. Where
Right.
4 of the days of the week are, named after Norse gods. We have Odin and Frigg and Tyr and Thor. Mom and dad and 2 kids.
Yeah.
Right? And then, well, you got to have the sun. That's a pretty fancy thing in the sky, and the moon, and and then there's the whole bit with Saturn, but that's kind of another story.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I mean, it's again, all that's natural. We have to just recognize that's one of the things that's so wonderful as you go through all the evolution of religion papers, is to really note how many things are just on every world. They're inescapably natural. I mean, every world has the ghost cult framework.
Okay.
You can't do it no evolving mortals come up with any other scheme. That's just inescapable. They all start with that.
Well, would you say, because I mean, when I go on like maybe providers like Netflix or something like that, it is all ghost stuff. It's all horror films and things like that. So what is your take on why are we still in this ghost fear stage, or what is it?
Well, again, because we're so natural still.
Okay.
And that's why I was bringing that up. We have to just recognize that the basic way we think isn't some sort of corruption, say, because of the rebellion or the fault or
Okay.
miseducation or whatever. It's just the natural state of mortals. That's the way we naturally think about things. We start with our dreams, we extrapolate from there into ghost land, and then we exalt that into spirit land, and that's just the way it goes.
Okay.
This is the way we think naturally. There's nothing more comfortable for us than to think that way.
Yeah.
You just totally let go of all your efforts to rise above your natural animal origin state, just sink into it, and you're right there. It feels so comfortable to just be there with that way of rationalizing the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it seems that we're also kind of missing that authority figure too on a planetary level.
Right. Of course. Right.
So it's very easy to be maybe kind of like misled in different ways.
Because this is natural. That's why you have princes and staffs on every world, Adam and Eve's on every world. You need those educators and mentors and examples of unnatural, right? And they should, inspire some interest to copy, and we all know how much everyone wanted to copy what they were up to. But that's important. Humans have a natural instinct to imitate. So you give them something decent to imitate.
Yeah.
You give them a corporeal staff, and everyone watches them, and they're very enamored by them, and they want to imitate them. They want males and females want to interact like they see them interacting, and
yeah, totally.
Right.
And so then there's this void then that.
Right,
so we're observing and we're learning while we're observing, but it isn't actually coming from that intention.
Because again, the only way is to have that unnatural example given to us. And without it, we're just nothing but natural mostly. Now, slowly over a long span of time, if you don't have the prince's staff explain to you that you shouldn't drink your sewage, and or even just you notice that the staff is not drinking their sewage,
right? And
so you do likewise. Right? I mean, eventually we figured it out, but it took us 200,000 years, for it to occur to us. I mean, we eventually can figure it out, but we're supposed to just be showing some of those things,
right? And then now we're kind of like we got ditched by those who were showing us stuff too a little bit, right? So we're just kind of like raising each other, but thankfully the Spirit of Truth is here.
And if we can, challenge ourselves to be a receiver, right?
What is that to you?
The Spirit of Truth is transmitting,
right?
But is it just twiddling its thumbs?
Well, what's your process of receiving, of reception? What is that?
Well, I mean, it all starts, the two, you might say unnatural or less natural spirit ministries, the thought adjuster and the Spirit of Truth. Both of them, as they tell you in paper 34, are predicated on the Holy Spirit. I mean, that's the framework that, within which the Spirit of Truth and the thought adjuster can function. And if you haven't taken delight in cultivating, giving that greater framework, developing a reflective life. I mean, a lot of people go through almost their entire life never reflecting on anything. They're just kind of in the moment and constantly caught off guard by everything that comes at them. It's like, who could have guessed that was going to happen? It's like, wow, okay, who couldn't guess that was going to happen? Right. So that basic, as they say in paper 16, section 6, when they introduce the three cosmic intuitions in the Holy Spirit, I mean, reflection. All it takes is a reflection.
And yet then Jesus always talks about, like being selfless, like get yourself out of the equation. So how do you suggest or recommend maybe an individual can be self-reflective without being so self-important?
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be introspective.
Okay,
that's negative. Reflective, not introspective. You're not staring at your navel. You're trying to attune to the cosmos, transcendent of you, and you're trying to reflect the cosmos within you. And again, remember, Jesus is not trying to do what the fifth epical revelation is trying to do. I mean, and what needs to happen if our civilization doesn't collapse. I mean, he was trying to just get them to basically take a hold of their by grace inner life. It's step 2 to actually start to try to do something with that inner life. Step 1 is to get people just to take a hold of it. That initial faith grasp, supply a nucleus for a genuine inner life. Fifth epical revelation comes along 2,000 years later and says, okay, if you've got that, if you've done step 1, now let's go to step 2 and all the steps after that. Let's do something with that inner life. Right? One must do something as well as be something. Right?
Amen. Yeah.
And now, as they begin to talk about your relationship to experiential deity, you start with the God the Father, that nucleus, that relationship to existential deity. Genuinely being able to say, I am. As a human, I am. Not an animal, which is delusionally I am. Animal just is, it is. Right. All there is an it is to an animal. A human is that I am. You have an observer point that capital I pronoun is referring to. Right. And it stands above the whole animal origin self, sees it. Right. You start with that existential nucleus that Jesus was trying to foster you taking a hold of. It's like, okay, if you've got that, now let's begin to develop an experiential nature, a real human experiential nature, a reflective-based life around that nucleus. It's what every adjuster has to do.
Yeah.
An adjuster is individuated from that pure existential deity of the Father. It's this purely existential fact, and it begins to accumulate an experiential nature around its core. That's what you relate to.
Yeah.
You know, you can't relate. You're an experiential being. You can't relate to that existential core of that adjuster.
Sure.
You relate to the experiential accumulation that it's developed in relationship to experiential deity.
Yeah, you know, I was just reflecting on that on my walk this morning of as far as original creativity, and that we're really only responding to that influence or inspiration or whatever, but it's not completely original. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's a simple little point of contrast to reflect. What's the difference between creative and inventive? A fancy animal is inventive, but only a human is creative, originative, right? You know, a fancy animal can take stimulus, antecedent causation, right, and react in very clever ways. It's like, well, you know, I could take that's being handed to me and I could do this with it. You can be clever, you can be inventive, but originative, creative, where, you know, you are the source of what's being brought into play. You know, you're not just really clever at taking something that's handed to you
and rearranging it.
Yeah.
It feels like most art is rearrangement.
Yes. I mean, you know, that reactive thing. I mean, is your life just rearranging molecules? Right? Or do you have an inner life, a real inner life that's creative, that's originative? Now, sure, it's just little children of God. It doesn't start out super fancy, but you got to start. Start doing those unnatural things that are relatively straightforward. And eventually you'll do things that are absolutely uniquely originative.
Can you give us some examples of unnatural things that are straightforward?
Well, the basic thing of to be genuinely religious is to be unnatural. Not to have, hyper degree of natural feelings about the outer life. That doesn't make you religious.
Right.
As they point out in the Revelation, to be genuinely religious is to be unnatural. The core of that is, what if you're exposed to a negative stimulus?
Okay. What's
natural? Naturally, you have a negative response to a negative stimulus. Oh yeah,
Sure.
Right. The unnatural thing is to have a positive response to a negative stimulus.
Right.
And as I was just saying, there's some basic things that humans have been working on for a long time of how you can have a positive response to a negative stimulus. So start with those.
Okay.
And to a degree, that's common, but it's becoming less and less common, and that's why there's an emergency. Okay, but there's so much more beyond that initial level of just not punching someone back if they punch you or something like that.
The eye for an eye.
The eye for an eye sort of a thing. Yeah. To begin that reflective life that can eventually get to the point where you achieve something called happiness. In contrast to joy.
Now, can you explain the difference for us?
Joy is a spiritual experience. Joy is you're put in a very positive environment and you feel that very deeply. You have a positive response to this delightfully wonderful, enveloping, positive,
comfort.
Yeah, right. I mean, you feel joy, in that. Happiness is completely unnatural. Happiness is something that you can only achieve in the midst of a very difficult, prickly, negative environment. But you stand unmoved. You have that same positive joy-like feeling within you, even though you shouldn't, based upon the environment.
That's why it's unnatural.
Right, based upon what's going on with you. And if you achieve that, it's joy-like, but it's transcendent. It's so much more. The feeling that you have, that word happiness is supposed to apply to, is that feeling that when you aren't being torn apart by an environment that wants to tear you apart, you feel your unshakable cosmic integrity, you're standing on it, the delight that you feel knowing that you have your feet in eternity and not in time, because if I had them in time right now, this would be very difficult.
So rock my world. Yeah.
That, to get to that, and just look at how 180 degrees it is. I mean, people want to use the word happiness for, oh, my dog is happy.
Right.
No, animals can't be happy.
Right.
By definition. Only a human in a fully unnatural mode can be happy.
Would you say happiness then is a choice?
Yes, happiness is purely a choice. Joy is a spiritual experience. Happiness is a choice.
Yeah, and I found some joy that I can get is usually comes from accomplishment of creative ventures for myself. Like I feel the accomplishment that comes with being able to have a concept, materialize it, and it's practical and usable, something like that. That usually is more sustainable things than having those fleeting, kind of sentimental, egoic, positive notions.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many people think they have a right to joy. Okay, they don't even have the sense of I have the right to pursue joy. No, they think they just have a right to joy. Okay, that's not what the Declaration says.
Okay,
it's a right to happiness,
right?
Which means you have a right to be free in an environment that would lead to just the opposite of joy. But you're going to stand unmoved. You're going to do something positive with that negative stimulus, at least within yourself.
Yeah.
You have a right to see the world not as a negative actuality and a helpless victim to it, but as a positive potentiality.
Yeah.
That's your genuine liberty, God-given right to stand in the midst of what would bring sorrow, but it doesn't.
Yeah, it even empowers.
To be a human.
Yeah.
That's your right.
Yeah.
See, but how many people, how many timid souls want that kind of a world? I mean, what does it tell you if you ask for assistance from your adjuster or your guardian angel or whatnot? Do they give you a pleasant environment that leads to joy? No, they give you the exact opposite.
It's a weight room, a celestial weight room. Get lifted.
Yeah, I mean, they're masters at speed bump builders, at building speed bumps. I mean, it's just, you see, because they want you to have the sublime chance, potential to find happiness. Mm-hmm. And you can only do that if you take a hold of your internal God-given cosmic integrity and stand unmoved in the presence of an environment that would do otherwise. I mean, that's the inevitabilities.
Yeah.
9 points of, is this desirable? Well, then your environment has to be negative.
Right.
Is this desirable? Well, then your environment has to be negative. Is this desirable? 9 times they tell you.
Yeah, I wonder because emotionally, we're cowards sometimes on this planet.
We're timid souls.
Yeah.
See, children of God are timid souls. Adults of God aren't.
Yeah, they're battle tested, rebellion tested.
Right, they're hardened steel.
Yeah.
Right? And especially on this world, you have the opportunity to be Agandonter steel.
What does that mean to you?
It means you can face anything. You can stand in the face of anything and stand unmoved, just like Amadon.
Yeah.
What of Amadon?
Yeah.
Right. That's your God-given opportunity on this world. But again, does the animal want to face that world? No, the animal, especially now that we're in the material comfort era, that's all we want is just cozier comfort.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's almost like I just want to envelop myself in my comfort.
I want to crawl back into the womb.
But here's the irony. Here's the beautiful irony is that the spirit of truth literally envelops you.
Yeah.
Is the holy comforter.
If you would move up to that, but remember again what comfort literally means. It's not like that fuzzy blanket on your bed.
Right.
Comfort means with strength.
Yeah.
Comfort, like fortify, right? Right. To have not just material strength, not even merely mental strength, but spiritual strength. Right, the warp and the woof. Right, those warp fibers, the spiritual fibers that give it strength. Right, the fuzzy stuff, the woof. Right, all would just blow away if you didn't have the immutable warp fibers, the spiritual fibers. That's what gives you real strength, spiritual strength. And if you're with that strength, if you're with spirit, that's comfort.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
Amen.
Yeah, it's he's not the warm blanket, the spirit of truth.
Yeah. So I just wonder why we're in that, why we think that way, that it's going to be comfortable and soft and easy, and I'm just going to feel like I'm fully accepted, right?
Yeah.
Why do we think that? Why are we in that way? Why are we programmed that way to think that?
I mean, again, there's two domains. There's the central universe, where they're just made perfect to begin with, never have to face a challenge of choosing, that which is good in the face of going with that which is bad.
Right.
We're the other domain.
Yeah.
The point is to start us out as removed from that as possible, and yet still have a tiny little thin thread of potential to get to eternity, right? To start us as removed from that, so that basically everything about you, unlike the Havona natives, is a choice. I mean, the only exception is that little initial encirclement, that initial thread of encirclement in the Holy Spirit that you're given by grace, that you didn't have to choose. But even that, eventually, you'll have to choose that too.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, you get to the Isle of Paradise as 100% choice, right? Nothing by grace.
Yeah.
Right, when all is said and done.
Yeah.
Even that initial bit of grace, you say, okay, I can take that myself now. Right?
Yeah.
I don't need to lean on that grace anymore. I stand on my own 2 feet. Yeah. You're whereas the Havona native, there's not one iota, of their perfection that is chosen.
Yeah. So you do see a blessing coming from where we are coming from.
Right. But it's difficult to, for the indolent animal to see things that way. We don't like to face pain, right? We don't like the statement in the book that says that pain and suffering are essential to progressive evolution.
Yeah.
We like to believe that pain and suffering are, caused by some evil force that's, made it so it isn't the Garden of Eden anymore.
Right. Yeah. We've fallen from grace.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's innate. The pain and suffering is essential to progressive evolution. It is literally the voltage that powers evolution. It's the differential across the poles of the battery. If you get rid of that, you short circuit the battery and evolution stops. There is no progress.
Wow.
See, and that's not a world that the pain avoiding, the indolent animal is interested in.
Yeah.
It wants the opposite.
So what do you see for us from where we are right now? Where do you see maybe that there's promising sections in the world where people aren't being that fearful animal? The school of hard knocks that they tell you we could have to face again, that interregnum, and they say, that fear and hunger will get you back
out of your delusional space. And that's hard medicine. But, you're seeing it already. I mean, when things get so out of whack, eventually some people go, wait a minute, there's something is not the way it's supposed to be. What's the deal here? I mean, it's right there in the paragraph where they say pain and suffering are essential to progressive evolution. They tell you the way it normally goes is until it gets literally painful, humans don't change. Unfortunately, mostly we're so immature, we have to learn by leaping still.
Right.
But they tell you, you don't have to go like that forever. Eventually you can learn by looking like an adult of God. But the child of God kind of has to take it to the point where, this is really, really hurting. It's like, well, stop doing what you're doing and it'll stop hurting.
Right.
The book is here to give people more of a potential to learn by looking. But again, like I said, it's really for that subset, that parallel stream.
Yeah.
The book says that there's never been more than 1% in any generation that have really been potential wise leaders.
Leadership, yeah.
Right. The main evolutionary stream, that 99% or so, it has to slog along as it just has to do. But none of us, I don't have to limit myself to the ignorance of others.
Right. Absolutely.
I can choose to step out of that stream. Right? I can't sequester myself. I still have to interact with all of the complications of the age in which I live. Sure. But I don't have to lead with it. Like Jesus said, don't seek first complete integration into the main evolutionary stream. Seek first the kingdom of heaven. Yeah, right? Yeah. Pull your inner life apart from that. Have an inner life that's defined by the cosmos, the universal harmony.
Yeah. I like what you say about having my feet on the earth, but you're still receiving.
Right. You're born with your feet planted in time. You can choose to rotate that 180 degrees and plant your feet in eternity. Okay. When your feet are planted in time, you have this desperate upreaching faith grasp. You're trying to reach up and hold on to eternity, but material gravity keeps pulling you down, and you're trying to, basically faith is just an antidote for fear.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
That's, because your feet are standing in temporal fear.
Sure.
Turn it the other way around. Plant your feet in eternity. Okay. Now it frees your hands to work in time.
Oh, okay.
Right? Instead of, your hands being totally occupied with me. What about me? I got to try to save myself. I got to try to hold on to eternity. And, no, take your salvation for granted. Well, you can't take your salvation for granted if your feet are planted in fear and in time.
Absolutely.
Right? Once your feet are planted in eternity, you're not really taking your salvation for granted. The whole salvation thing just disappears. It's like, okay, no real harm can befall me.
Yeah.
I'm predicated on eternity.
Yeah.
Which doesn't give one whit about time.
Yeah. And supreme comfort in knowing that. It's like the more material you are, the more separated from the source you become, and then the more afraid you are.
Yeah, when Jesus planted his feet in eternity and started to use his hands in the world, they thought he was insane. They thought he was beside himself. It's like, because it's like, well, no one can have that kind of peace unless they're just utterly delusional, right? And not seeing what's in front of them.
Right. Well, that reminds me a lot of what I feel in this time and age of, everyone's trying to be provoked with the news and everything like that. And I'm always constantly asked, why are you not freaking out about this right now?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
Right. You're beside yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just, see, how are you ever going to have that cosmic fruit of the Spirit called enduring peace with your feet planted in time? That's impossible. There is no enduring peace in time. There's always something that happens. right? If it's not some sort of war or something, it's a supernova.
Sure,
okay, there's
sure.
always something, some calamity in time.
Okay.
Right? There is no enduring peace in time. Only eternity can give you enduring peace.
Only eternity. Well, I think that's a poetic way for us to kind of close it off. I was kind of hoping maybe you could let us part in with something. Maybe could you talk to us a little bit about the Milky Way or something like that? Just some kind of sexy factoid for our friends.
We kept kind of getting off of the science thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the Urantia book offers so many wonderful, better initial assumptions for science. Logical, reality-based assumptions, like what makes a spiral galaxy fundamentally with that kind of a form, and the details, you don't have to invent some magical dark matter to explain it. There's whirls in the force charge of space. Yeah. Space is not a vacuum. It's pervaded by primordial force, and you start with a whirl in that, and then ultimatons coalesce within that whirl, out of that whirl, and stars eventually are there, and they're caught up in the whirl, to a high degree still. So there's this beautiful quasi record platter that all those stars, are affixed to. That's spinning around and around. There's all of that. There's all of it gives you for fundamental physics, particle physics, to actually go beyond the universe of matter that we currently assume to the real universe of motion.
Now, what's your take on extraterrestrial involvement? I know there's a little bit about the non-breathers that maybe are nearby us.
Well, before you get to any sort of literal extraterrestrial, we have to come face the fact that there's permanent inhabitants of this planet. The secondary midwares, right? There's going to be stuff, occasionally they have to do things, and we're going, well, humans didn't do that. It must have been aliens from another planet. No, that's permanent inhabitants here. And the fact that we have 2 inhabited planets in our solar system, and the other one's in a non-breather world,
right, way
out there in the outer reaches of the solar system. And as they say, you would be more than interested in the planetary conduct of this type of mortal. Right?
Are there any theories as to which planet that is or where it is?
Right. That would be the planet we haven't discovered yet. We've basically discovered 11 of the 12.
Okay.
The one we haven't discovered is the one that's just outside of the Kuiper belt.
Okay.
It's what causes there to be an outer edge to that Kuiper belt, the so-called Kuiper cliff.
Okay.
And people say, well, if there was a planet there, we'd see it. Well, not if they're not letting the sun's light reflect off of it. Oh. Right? The non-breathers have advanced technology. If you look between the lines of what they tell you in the book, I mean, they obviously have anti-gravity technology and all kinds of things. So, I'm sure if you went back, prior to us having advanced telescopes, and pointed a telescope in the sky, you could have seen it.
You see some stuff.
Way back in the day, you would have seen it up there. But, now, I mean, eventually, see, that's the thing. That's the other thing. I mean, at some point, every solar system that has more than one inhabited world, I mean, it's not way in light and life when finally those 2 planets meet. That happens really early on in the process.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already beginning to explore the solar system. So, right, I mean, they know that this is not too far off, this planetary authorities and stuff. For no other reason, our exploratory, desires, at some point, these 2 worlds are going to become known to each other, and that's going to change everything.
Wow. That's going to be exciting.
And, and you can easily speculate that because of the type of world that, we have, a non-breather world, with all their innately advanced technology, you probably are not going to wait until light and life to bring the Midwayer culture in with the mortal culture either.
That's true too. There will be an engagement of the Midwayer culture.
Yeah. I mean, not only should you not fear about material affairs because the Most High's rule in the kingdoms of men, but also, I mean, once we have access to all the advanced knowledge of the midwares and the non-breathers, you don't have to worry about energy problems or anything like that. That's nothing to fear.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Or nuclear waste or whatever.
Yeah.
All that stuff will be easily taken care of.
Good.
That's nothing to have an existential fear about. So a lot of those sorts of things, on the one side it's positive, on the other side it's like, well, they tell you that a lot of important human evolution happened because the climate changed. Don't think that the powers that be are going to make sure that climate stays cozy.
That's going to stop, right. Yeah.
That might be part of the process.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up because it's kind of interesting how we still want to be cozy.
Yeah.
But it's hard to be cozy and advance. There's no advancing in coziness, right? So a lot of this, it's forcing us to make decisions and make choices.
I mean, we're given minds, hence we're given adaptability. If we're given that a potential of adaptability, I'll bet you there's going to be reasons that we need to adapt.
Yeah.
That will come our way.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, if you never had to adapt, you wouldn't be minded.
Right.
So don't be surprised if thought adjusters or seraphim or climate or whatever
is nudges
you to adapt.
Well,
that's just the universe we live in.
Amen to that. And I pray that we can all adapt wisely.
Yeah.
So with that, I just want to thank you, Chris, for joining us. And thank you guys at home for joining us. It's just been a pleasure. And please come back. You're totally invited back anytime. And we'd love to have you. And thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was wonderful, Derek.
All right. And thanks again, you guys. Stay tuned. Please like, share, subscribe. We're going to have Chris back again. And thank you. Stay tuned for more episodes. Thanks again, Chris.